He walked into the hardware store with nothing but a crumpled piece of paper and $30 cash. The fluorescent lights buzzed overhead, casting harsh shadows on his weathered face. The young manager behind the counter barely looked up from his tablet. When the old man approached, his voice was quiet, respectful when he spoke. "Excuse me, son, I need some screws and brackets to fix my neighbor's wheelchair ramp. It collapsed yesterday, and she can't get out of her house." The manager glanced at the paper, then at the man's worn clothes, his missing left arm, the faded Marine Corps tattoo barely visible on his right forearm. "Look, old man, this isn't a charity. We don't do payment plans, and $30 won't cover what you need here. Try the dollar store down the street." The old man didn't argue, he never did. He just nodded, folded the paper carefully, and walked toward the door. But he paused, turned back, and said quietly, "Her name is Mrs. Chen. She's 89 years old and hasn't eaten in 2 days because she can't get to the store. I promised her I'd fix it today." The manager laughed, called over to his assistant. "Hey, Jake, check this out. We got ourselves a regular Bob the Builder here. Thinks we're running a soup kitchen." The assistant joined in. "Yeah, maybe try the Salvation Army, Grandpa. They love sob stories." The old man's jaw tightened for just a second, then he straightened his shoulders, walked out without another word. What they didn't know was that the woman restocking shelves in Azel 3 had been listening to every word, and she knew exactly who they had just humiliated. Welcome to the human stories before weave into this incredible tale of disrespect, compassion. And what happens when you underestimate the wrong person? Tell me in the comments what city you're watching from today. And if I believe some heroes never wear capes, but they've earned the right to be treated with dignity, hit that subscribe button. This is stories remind us why character matters. The hardware store's at in a strip mall, between a pizza place and a dry cleaner. Nothing special, just another corporate chain where everything was overpriced and customer service was a foreign concept. The manager, Derek, was 23 years old, hired 6 months ago. Because his uncle owned the franchise, he spent most of his time on social media and treated every customer like an interruption. His assistant, Jake, was worse. If that was possible, both of them had never worked. Their job never served anything but themselves, and certainly never learned what sacrifice actually meant. At exactly 2 p.m. the front door opened again, but this time it wasn't one person. It was 7. The woman from Azel 3 had made a phone call, and now everything was about to change. They didn't storm it, they didn't make a scene. They simply walked through the door with the kind of presence that makes the air itself stand at attention. 6 men and 1 woman, all wearing different clothes, but carrying themselves with identical purpose. The oldest among, maybe 60, with silver hair and scars across his knuckles, stepped forward first. Derek looked up, from his tablet, confused, annoyed that his afternoon scrolling was being interrupted. "Can I help you folks?" The silver-haired man didn't smile, didn't introduce himself, just spoke in a voice that had commanded troops under fire. "An hour ago, one of our brothers came in here, asked for help fixing a wheelchair ramp for his neighbor, paid you $30 cash, and you laughed at him, told him to try the dollar store." Derek's face went pale. He glanced toward Jake, who was suddenly very interested in organizing pens behind the counter. "I think there's some kind of misunderstanding, sir." The woman stepped forward. She was maybe 50, with short gray hair and eyes that had seen too much. "No misunderstanding. Son, we heard every word you said to Staff Sergeant Martinez." She placed something on the counter, a Purple Heart medal in a small frame. "He earned this in Fallujah, 2004, lost his arm, saving 3 Marines from an IED explosion. Never talked about it. Once came home, learned carpentry, so he could help people fix things around their homes for free." Derek stared at the medal, his mouth slightly open, realizing he had just made the worst mistake of his young life. Another man stepped forward, this one younger, maybe 40, with the bearing of someone who had never backed down from anything. "Martinez doesn't ask for handouts, doesn't want recognition, just wanted to help an old lady who can't get out of her house, and you treated him like garbage." He pulled out his phone, showed Derek a photo, 8 Marines in desert camouflage, arms around each other, dust on their faces, but smiling. The man in the center was recognizable, even missing an arm. "That's your charity case. Derek, that's the man you sent to the dollar store." Jake finally found his voice, though it came out as barely a whisper. "We didn't know he was a veteran." The silver-haired man's expression didn't change. "You didn't ask. You didn't care. You saw a man with 1 arm and $30 and decided he wasn't worth your time." He reached into his pocket, pulled out a receipt, and placed it next to the Purple Heart. Here's what happened after you threw him out. Martinez went to 3 other stores, spent his last $30 on whatever screws he could afford, went home, and tried to fix that ramp with inadequate materials. It collapsed again this morning. Mrs. Chen fell trying to navigate it. She's in the hospital now with a broken hip. The silence in the store was deafening. Derek felt like he might throw up. Jake was backing toward the office door, hoping to escape, but there was nowhere to run from what they had done. The woman Marine spoke again, her voice cutting through the quiet like a blade. "We're not here to threaten you. We don't need to. What you did speaks for itself. But that ramp is getting fixed today, the right way with the right materials." She placed a business card on the counter. "This is the number for Martinez's construction business. He's been doing this for 15 years, helped over 200 families in this community, never charged a penny for labor." Another Marine stepped forward, placed a folder on the counter. "These are letters from the families he's helped, single mothers whose porches were falling apart, elderly veterans who couldn't maintain their homes, disabled folks who needed ramps and railings. Martinez fixed all of it, asked for nothing but the cost of materials, and half the time he paid for those too." Derek opened the folder with shaking hands. Inside were dozens of handwritten thank you notes, photos of completed projects, testimonials about a man who had given his arm for his country, and then spent the next 20 years giving his time to his community. The silver-haired Marine wasn't finished. "We called Mrs. Chen's family. They're flying in from California to be with her. Martinez is at the hospital right now, sitting in the waiting room because he blames himself for not having better materials, blames himself for trying to do the job with $30 worth of hardware when it needed 150. He leaned forward slightly, his voice dropping, but somehow becoming more intense. "That man has never asked for anything from anybody, never complained about his disability, never sought recognition for his service, and you made him feel like a beggar." Derek tried to speak, tried to find words that might somehow undo what had happened. But the Marines weren't interested in apologies. They were interested in results. "Here's what's going to happen," the woman continued. "You're going to load everything needed for that ramp into a truck. You're going to deliver it to Martinez's house, and you're going to tell him it's on the house. You're going to do it personally, and you're going to apologize, not because we're making you, but because it's the right thing to do." Jake finally spoke up, his voice cracking. "But the cost, the materials, that's probably $300 worth of stuff. My uncle will fire me." The youngest Marine in the group stepped forward. He couldn't have been more than 25, but his presence filled the room. "Your uncle will fire you for treating a decorated veteran with respect, for making sure an elderly woman has a safe way to leave her house." He paused. "Let that sink in. If that's the kind of business he's running, maybe you shouldn't be working here anyway." The silver-haired Marine reached into his wallet, pulled out a business card, and handed it to Derek. "This is my company. We do government contracting specifically with veteran-owned businesses. Martinez has been trying to get certified for years, but he's too humble to push his application through the bureaucracy." He smiled for the first time since entering the store, but it wasn't a friendly smile. "Consider his certification fast-tracked, and Derek, if you ever, and I mean ever, treat a veteran with anything less than the respect they've earned, you'll answer to all of us." They didn't wait for a response. They didn't need to. They simply turned and walked out the same way they had come, in leaving behind a silence that felt heavier than the weight of every tool in the store. Derek stood frozen behind the counter, staring at the Purple Heart, the photos, the letters, evidence of a life spent in service to others, while he had spent his life serving only himself. Jake had disappeared into the office, probably calling his uncle, probably trying to figure out how to explain what had just happened. By 4 p.m., Derek was loading his personal truck with everything needed to build a proper wheelchair. Ramp, lumber, screws, brackets, sandpaper, stain, everything Martinez had asked for and more. His hands shook as he loaded each piece, not from the physical effort, but from the realization of what kind of man he had humiliated that morning. Had drove to Martinez's address, a small house on the edge of town with a perfectly maintained yard and an American flag hanging from the porch. Martinez was sitting on his front steps when Derek pulled up, still wearing the same clothes from that morning. His face showed no anger, no resentment, just the quiet dignity of a man who had learned long ago that not everyone understands the cost of freedom. Derek got out of the truck, approached slowly, like you might approach a wounded animal. "Mr. Martinez, I'm Derek from the hardware store. I brought the materials for the ramp." Martinez looked at the truck loaded with supplies, then at Derek, his expression unreadable. "You didn't have to do this, son." Derek felt tears starting to form in his eyes. "Yes, sir, I did. I was wrong this morning. I was disrespectful and ignorant, and I'm sorry." Martinez stood up, walked over to the truck, ran his hand along the lumber, checking the quality out of habit. "This is good material. This will hold Mrs. Chen for the next 20 years. He turned to Derek. "She's going to be okay, by the way, broken hip, but she's tough." Derek nodded, not trusting his voice. Martinez continued, "You know what the hardest part about losing my arm wasn't the pain, wasn't learning to tie my shoes one-handed. It was the way people started looking at me like I was broken, like I needed their pity." He gestured toward the materials. "I don't need charity, Derek. I just needed you to treat me like a customer, like a human being." Derek found his voice finally. "How can I make this right? How can I fix what I did?" Martinez smiled for the first time that day. "You just did, son. You just did." He extended his right hand. "Now help me unload this truck. Mrs. Chen wants to come home tomorrow, and I promised her she'd have a ramp waiting." They worked together for the next 3 hours. Derek learning more about construction in one afternoon than he had learned about respect in 23 years of life. Martinez didn't lecture, didn't make him feel worse than he already did, just taught them how to measure twice cut-ons and why quality materials matter. When someone's safety is on the line, as the sun started to set, they stood back and looked at the completed ramp, solid, sturdy, built to last longer than either of them would be around. "She's gonna love this," Derek said. Martinez nodded. "She better. I promised her it would be perfect, and Marines don't break promises." Derek realized he had learned something else that day about integrity, about keeping your word even when no one is watching, especially when no one is watching. The next morning, Derek arrived at work to find his uncle waiting for him, along with a reporter from the local newspaper and a photographer. "Derek, what's this?" "I'm hearing about you giving away $300 worth of materials." Derek straightened his shoulders, looked his uncle in the eye. "I helped a decorated Marine build a wheelchair ramp for his elderly neighbor. It was the right thing to do." His uncle's face was red with anger. "The right thing would have been checking with me first." The reporter stepped forward. "Actually, Mr. Phillips, I'm here because of what your nephew did yesterday. 7 Marines came to my office with a story about respect and doing right by veterans." She showed them her notepad. "Turns out Staff Sergeant Martinez has been helping this community for 15 years. Never charged for labor, never asked for recognition, just quietly making life better for people who needed help." She looked at Derek. "What you did yesterday wasn't charity, it was justice." The photographer had been taking pictures while they talked. "We'd like to run a story about this, the Marine who serves his community and the young man who learned what honor really means." Derek's uncle looked confused, angry, still focused on the bottom line. "I don't understand why this is news. Martinez came in here, acted like we owed him something." The reporter's expression hardened. "Mr. Phillips Martinez asked to buy materials to help an elderly woman. He had $30, and you laughed at him." Derek stepped forward. "Uncle, if you have a problem with what I did, then fire me, but I won't apologize for treating a veteran with respect." His uncle looked around the store at the customers who had stopped to listen, at the employees who were watching, at the reporter taking notes, and he realized that his nephew had just taught him a lesson about business that no MBA program could provide. "I'm not firing anybody," he said quietly. "Derek, you're getting a raise." By the end of the week, the story had gone national, not because it was sensational, but because it was real. A young man learning to see past his own assumptions saved Taryn, who never stopped serving a community that came together to honor. Both Martinez received calls from contractors across the state, offering him jobs, offering partnerships, offering the recognition he had never sought. Derek received something more valuable. He received a lesson in what it means to be a man. Mrs. Chen came home to her new ramp 3 days later. Martinez was there to help her test it, make, Sure, She felt safe using it. Derek was there too, not because he had to be, but because he wanted to see the result of doing something right. For once, she hugged Martinez with tears in her eyes, then surprised Derek by hugging him too. "Thank you both," she said, "for remembering that we're all neighbors." 6 months later, Derek was running the store differently, not just because his uncle told him to, but because he had learned something about leadership, about service, about seeing people for who they really are. Martinez's construction business had grown and now had 3 employees, all veterans, and a contract with the county to build accessibility improvements for senior housing. Derek had recommended him personally. They still saw each other regularly. Derek would stop by job sites. Martinez would come by the store. They had become something neither expected. Friends, the kind forged not by common interests, but by shared growth, by the recognition that everyone deserves dignity, especially those who have earned it the hard way. Martinez never talked about his service, never displayed his medals, but Derek learned to recognize the signs in other customers, the bearing the scars, the quiet strength of people who had given more than most, who'd ever understand. The Purple Heart still sits on the counter at the hardware store, not as decoration, but as a reminder that heroes don't always look like what we expect. That's C. Arvis doesn't end when you take off the uniform, that sometimes the most important battles are fought. Not with weapons, but with dignity, with respect, with the simple recognition that everyone has a story worth hearing. Staff Sergeant Martinez didn't need Derek's apology to know his own worth. He didn't need recognition to continue serving his community, but Derek needed to give both to become the man. He was capable of being. Sometimes the person who changes the most isn't the one being honored. It's the one doing the honoring. And sometimes the greatest victory isn't in the battle itself, but in learning why the battle was worth fighting in the first places. I'll ask you this: have you ever met someone like Staff Sergeant Martinez, someone who serves quietly, who gives without expecting anything in return, who carries the weight of others without complaint? Write their story in the comments, how they changed your community. Say the things they would never say about themselves, because heroes shouldn't have to fight for respect. They've already earned it. And if this story reminded you why character matters, why service continues long after the uniform comes off, hit that subscribe button. We're here to make sure stories like Martinez never get told. Until next time, remember that the measure of a person isn't in what they've wrecked, it's in what they've given. And sometimes the greatest gift we can give is simply recognizing the gifts others have already given. Thus, we'll see you in the next story. And remember, every veteran has a story. Every story deserves respect.